Social justice means applying the law equally to all people, but in practice, that doesn't always happen. I'm John Gonzalez. I'm here with my former law partner, Jack DeRora. We practice law, we seek social justice. On this show, we reveal the conflict between the two.
You know, for a while, it was just us in the office over a cup of coffee talking about the news of the day. With social justice issues dominating our culture, our focus became how do we, as lawyers, make a difference?
And now it's not just us. Today we have Professor Laura Dugan, Ohio State University Department of Sociology, with an expertise in criminology. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Jack, I don't know if I had ever told you, but in law school, in my law school, Capital, they gave the book award for the student with the highest score in the class.
Beautiful.
The only book award I got in the 3 years I was in law school was in my criminal law class. And I took it in the summer.
Beautiful.
It was a 50-question multiple choice, and the professor said that I was the only one that got all of them right. And how much criminal law do you think I practiced over the last 38 years?
If it's not zero, it's close to it.
Right. But a fascinating area. And, you know, one of the things that, the class that stuck with me was, why do we need criminal laws? Right? What's the function? How does it fit into society? And obviously, it's a deterrent from committing crime.
Sure.
But there's other ways to stop crime. And do you think that the Trump administration has got a good idea by just putting armed law enforcement people on every corner of a city?
No.
I think it works.
I think it, first of all, as you know, I hardly am a criminologist, right? But I would, on an intuitive level, I would think that lots of, we like to say in the news, or as the journalists like to say in the news, boots on the ground, that likely deters crime. But I don't see it as doing what is necessary to reduce crime overall.
Well, we have somebody here that is going to hopefully explain this to us so that we can understand it. Professor Dugan, what's wrong with using the National Guard to police crime in certain cities?
Well, I want to first say that it seems pretty clear that President Trump hasn't read the criminology research. So what is wrong with it is that crime is a local event, if you think about it. And there are people whose whole job is it to study the dynamics of crime within the city and to address those dynamics of crime. And the crime research over the years has shown that the best way of addressing it is through understanding it. And by making decisions and making strategic and tactical decisions to address not just the actual crime that's happening, unfolding, but the underlying causes of those crimes, right? And so depending on what the modal crime type is in the city, police are being strategic. Not all of them, but over the years that has evolved. And it used to be that they thought something like putting lots of boots on the ground and policing in neighborhoods would reduce crime. This is sort of randomized patrolling. And it's been shown over and over and over again that doesn't work.
Randomized patrolling in specific, you mean?
Yes. So just putting officers on the ground and having them randomly go through neighborhoods. That actually isn't a deterrent. However, you add lots of military to the streets with big guns, that may have an effect. But, I want to point out that crime has been on the decline. And in all of these cities, but nationally, it has been on the decline. And so just like the great decline in crime in the 1990s, everyone claims responsibility for it, right?
It's funny how that works.
Yeah. But it not only was it happening in every city in the U.S. and across it was actually happening across the globe too. And so to even say that by Trump putting the National Guards in these cities, and then we saw a crime drop, kind of ignores the fact that it had been dropping all along.
Well, that shows correlation at best, but not causation.
Exactly.
What I'm really struck by are the first words out of your mouth, which were, you have to understand what's behind the crime.
Yes.
But that's the core starting point for any problem, whether we're talking disease, economics, whatever. You have to understand what you're looking at. And I didn't see a whole lot of probing about what causes crime in the administration before sending in the troops.
No, that is because the president has put out a narrative on what crime looks like in these cities. And so with the narrative that the president has used, there's no need to look any further into, and I'm saying this facetiously.
Sure.
But if people buy that narrative, there's no need to look at what's behind it. And this is why I'm saying, crime is a local phenomena. And there are experts in the police department who study that phenomenon so that they can make strategic decisions.
But doesn't a reduction in crime involve more than just police? And here's what I mean by that. When I think of police, I think of an agency that is reactive. You're responding to a murder, a rape, an armed assault, a collision. You're reactive. Now, you've suggested that there are within police departments groups that study how to reduce crime. But I got to believe that the majority of effort, this is just me guessing, I'm just a dumb old business lawyer, retired business lawyer, that the majority of the effort of the police department, any police department, is reactive, not proactive. Am I wrong about that?
You are not wrong.
Okay.
You are not wrong. Resourced police departments that have a unit within it to help do crime analysis can be more proactive. There's a number of types of policing, excuse me, like problem-solving policing that looks more into what's happening. And there's been a lot of research that focused in on different cities and found success in doing this, where they study what most of the crime is, what is driving most of the crime. Like, for instance, it's been shown repeatedly that a large percent of criminal activities in some cities come from a small group of people. A large amount of crime in cities come from a number of different neighborhoods in those cities.
So in that when you're dealing with that kind of situation, then it would seem that the police the police is the appropriate unit to, for lack of a better phrase, target those small groups that are at the crux of the crime wave. But when you're looking to reduce crime overall, I got to believe you require resources outside of the police department.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what does that look like?
Well, let me pause for a second before answering that. Criminology is this study. So there's criminology and there's criminal justice. And criminal justice is looking at the system of the criminal justice system and doing it. Criminology is studying the causes and consequences and, why are these people who grew up exactly the same way going on two different trajectories. So it gets more into the sociology of it, of where crime comes from. And so there's a lot of research that gets into that. And from that research, there are recommendations that have come out. So for instance, providing health care and so findings that have been consistent is providing health care as well as family planning, as well as maternity resources in education to low-income pregnant women has been found to reduce the criminality that comes from those families through randomized trials repeatedly. So looking at those who are most vulnerable and finding ways to help meet these low-hanging needs. I say low-hanging needs is it doesn't cost a lot to provide these sort of nursing to people who need it. So more social services are providing alternatives to going out and doing criminal activities, providing a safety net in a way that gives people more to think about than how am I going to feed my family? How am I going to deal with my reputation on the streets?
To Gonzo and me, who have had on this show a number of people who speak to lack of education, resources, etc., what you say makes sense. I have a sense. I also would think that everything you've just said to the average hardcore conservative politician sounds like crazy talk.
Interestingly, hardcore Republican politicians of the 1970s would have endorsed everything I just said. There's been a trend over time where things that have, generally been accepted as part of what we should be doing has been framed as radical, as leftist. And this is just simply caring for those who are most vulnerable. And so, unfortunately, that I agree with you. It's going to make people squirm, and that's part of what the narrative that has been pushed by those that I think are a little bit more extreme on the conservative side.
Gonzo, when's the last time you heard a politician say anything about caring for the most vulnerable?
Well, it goes back to what a lot of our discussions in this area go back to, and that's money, right? Social services cost money. Politicians don't want to spend money on social services, and I agree that they've this narrative is pervasive that these people aren't working for society, yet they're taking money from society. But then you look at the cost of sending the National Guard into cities, or the cost of crime on these cities, and you wonder if it's just a cost analysis. Is it cheaper to put the money into social services than the other costs? Have people studied that?
Yes, there have been lots of comparisons social services don't cost a lot. These are people who are really working on shoestring budgets. These are mission-driven organizations, and sure, they would like to have more resources, but we can address a lot of needs. Again, I called it low-hanging fruit. I want to say something that has struck me over the years. Reasonable people who I don't know what their political affiliations are, but people who I know and care about, who I deem reasonable, have conjured this idea of the crack mom who's taking advantage of welfare, and it's that kind of thing that kind of makes those who are conservative cringe. Mm-hmm. And then it's sure, there are people who take advantage of things like that, but that is not the problem. The few people who vote for who do some sort of deceptive voting, or that is not the problem. Mm-hmm. I had a friend who worked at a food kitchen back in Pittsburgh years ago, and she said in the back room of the food kitchen they have a sign up that says you have to feed the greedy to get to the needy.
Ooh,
yeah,
I like that. Right.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. So because of this narrative of the crack mom, mm-hmm. right? We're not going to send nurses to homes of people who are lost. Being a mother, being pregnant is frightening, especially when you can't even feed the people that are in the family now.
Well, catchy narratives can overtake reality.
Yes.
remember President Reagan created the narrative of the welfare queen. Remember that?
Yes.
Well, so if politicians, because that's who's control the purse strings, aren't going to spend more money on social services, do you acknowledge that increased law enforcement, including what the Trump administration does, is having some effect on reducing crime?
I don't know.
Okay.
I in preparing for this, I did some digging around. I can tell you that, and what I found is that these, again, have been places where there's been a reduction ahead of time. Now, what I can say is boots on the ground is useful for things like Mardi Gras, right? Where you have a bunch of people out drinking and wanting to do crazy things, and they see somebody standing there with a gun, they're going to go the other way, or they're going to temper even the drunkest of people. So when you have an intense event like that, it's good to have security, but a number of communities have tension with police already, and so you bring in untrained for local law enforcement, like people who are trained to do military operations, into a neighborhood or into communities where there's already tension between police and those people that live there, and it's a setup for bad things.
I go back to with a lot of what the Trump administration does, and it's not just this president, it's been past, but the idea of reducing crime is good, and it's hard to argue with that. And if it's done correctly, a lot more people would support it. I always think of the what we used to call the beat cop. It wasn't just the presence of the cop, but it was also the community liaison, the working with it. And if you could deploy even these troops, one, train them correctly for law enforcement, but two, deploy them in the right way, I could see it being a benefit. One governor, and Jack, I can't remember who it was, went ahead and called up the National Guard, and they did a kind of, I would call it behind-the-scenes law enforcement function, right? Not on the streets,
right,
but working, I would say, in a back office doing stuff that needed to be done that freed up law enforcement. And I thought, now, if the administration really wanted to reduce crime, and it wasn't about something else, which we all suspect it is.
Right.
There's ways to do it right. And so I guess, Professor, I'm not necessarily against boots on the ground if they're boots on the ground in the office, so to speak, and not on my street corner.
Your point is awesome. And the reason it's awesome is because the National Guard worked with local law enforcement to address the needs that they delineated, and that, I think, is that would be very useful. Most police departments are under-resourced, and how to use resources, I think, is probably the overarching big question that scholars have been looking at for decades. And so strategic policing, as I mentioned, is something that's really important, but can they do it when they're fighting fires, right? And so to use the National Guard in a way that they can do what they do best, or they can do what's most helpful without making things worse in the community. Policing, it has been shown that when law enforcement's able to build relationships in communities, like true relationships, not just not just surface relationships, but true relationships in the communities, then they can be of service. They can be. These are law enforcement's public servants. They're public safety. That their goal or their role is to make things better in communities, so that when things go wrong, people can call them and they can help. That takes relationship building. And so if the National Guard can come in and do what the local police chief asks of them to do, that's why I started with crime is local.
Mm-hmm.
Having somebody come from, which, by the way, doesn't seem to be the conservative perspective, is to have the federal government come in and impose its will upon local communities. That isn't going to be helpful.
That's what bothers me as a Republican. I know Jack shaking his head. It's this idea that the federal government is actually sending troops into our states. And, Gavin Newsom and a couple of the other Democrat governors have pushed back and have gone to the National Governors Association and said, hey, even you Republican governors can't be for this. This is not the way that, the country should be run. And I don't think they've gotten very far with people like Mike DeWine or some of your more conservative state governors. And I really don't understand that from a conservative perspective.
My guess is those governors are just yielding to the party line, and nobody wants to create a fissure with President Trump. I don't think it's any more I would guess it's no more complicated than that.
If I was the most important person in the state from that perspective, like the governor, I would be very jealous about anybody coming in and trying to do my job for me. But having said that, the National Guard has its own problems with deployment. It's got constitutional and statutory restrictions. And we know from the buildup of ICE over the last even 6 months, all the money that was put into recruiting more agents and putting more people into that role, that we could beef up actual law enforcement. I mean, there's obviously money for it. How much money did they, in the last bill, did they attribute to the ICE and to
I can't remember the number, but I think it was 3 times what it was in years past. Does that sound right?
Yeah. Yes, it was much more.
So we know they can put the resources into law enforcement. They've just chosen to do one that didn't seem to really be targeting what the administration tells us, which is reducing crime in our biggest cities.
But from a conservativist point of view, I would gather that what President Trump is doing is sexy, right? Crime, bad. Soldiers, good. Let's put a lot of soldiers in there, and I'll show how tough I am. I don't know if the calculus is any more complicated than that.
But that, to me, doesn't resonate. And again, I point to my conservative background. It really doesn't. So I don't know how it's resonating with conservatives. It may be resonating with our MAGA friends who seem like,
I think we're going to go down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out the politics behind all this. And that's a different subject, if I could say so. The real issue, or the issue we're exploring, is how to better reduce crime. The politics is another podcast, if you'll indulge me, Gonzo.
I though would be happy to top this off with a statement, not that you have to let me be the final say, is that it's really hard to have policy without politics. And so I think it's really important to pay attention to where policy comes from. I have my PhDs in public policy, and I did all this research to figure out how to create the optimal policy and how to assess things in the proper ways, and then only to find that people are going to reject the policies because it's not politically salient, salient, or it's not going to help their careers. And so what's my take on what's happening now is that we'll just have Trump as a constant. We know he's putting out these narratives, and he's pushing these policies that any other politician, like anyone who would have run for office, say 10 years ago or 15 years ago, would not be elected. They would be considered fringe. But because he has the support of MAGA and a broad base of people who may not have been in the electorate years ago, Republicans have to make decisions, and they have to decide whether they're going to go along with that narrative or not. And if they don't, they may lose their standing. They may lose their positions. We've seen a number of politicians who are leaving office take stands against what President Trump is doing. But it is a different topic. But I think it does encourage us to see what's happening more critically and not to just buy the line of the narratives. And unfortunately, it also makes it difficult to have conversations with others who are buying that line. But I think we can encourage people to look at things a little bit differently.
And, when you think about reducing crime, it does seem to me it starts with politics. And my prediction is that the Trump policies are going to be widely rejected at the ballot box, right? But that's only a start. I mean, if we're going to say, hey, you're doing it wrong, I think that if the Democrats take control, they need to then do it correctly. And again, I go back to there may be some utility to what we've now seen might work or what might not work. But I really think that the politics of it from the Democrat side is not to go back to where we were, which, Professor, you said may have actually been working to some extent, but the perception was bad.
Right.
And so, I would love to see whoever gets in, control of the government in the next 10 years really work on these things now that we've seen the flaws in the system.
Well said. I want to talk about statistics for a moment.
Okay.
I've reviewed crime statistics from the FBI over the course of the years for things that I write about. It seems to me, my memory, I haven't looked at the stats in a year or two, but if I were to look at the FBI stats today, the most current stats I get would probably be 2024 at best.
Yes.
And that sounds kind of silly, but when you think about it, they're drawing stats from 50 states. They got to correlate. So you're always working a year behind. Okay, yeah. That's the prefacing statement. Now, I can't remember where I saw this. It might have been on the White House website, but it said, crime in D.C. has plummeted since President Trump began his crackdown. All violent crime is now, bear in mind, hold on for a second. The troops entered Washington, D.C. on August 11, 2025. Homicide is down 71%. Violent crime is down 40%. Burglary is down 46%. Who's putting these stats together so quickly? Where does this come from?
Well, I have two answers for that.
You can give them both.
Okay. The first answer is that I'm skeptical, yeah. and only because the president has been known to make up numbers in the past. And so when they come out that quickly, there's a good chance that he's just making up numbers because they can't really be checked. The second answer is more general in that police departments are collecting crime data all the time. And so the data that you've made reference to is the Uniform Crime Reports that's put out by the FBI. And that goes through a whole lot of processing. It has to be turned in by police departments to the state and then compiled by the state and then brought to the FBI. It's voluntary, so those aren't great data. There's been this shift over time to use computer-based crime reporting, which is instantaneous. NIBRS, which is a system which the Uniform Crime Reports has been adopting, is increasingly using those sorts of systems over time. Having said that, a lot of criminologists will just form relationships with local police departments and use their data. And so it wouldn't be difficult for the White House to use the data from the Washington, D.C. Police Department to get those numbers because they have those numbers. Did they do that? I don't know. But, when when they first announced that they were going to deploy the National Guard to Washington, D.C., a number of local leaders were saying crime has been down. There is no crime crisis here. There is no homicide crisis. I mean, we're all old enough to remember when Washington, D.C. was the crime capital, or I'm sorry, the homicide capital, murder capital of the country. It's not. It's not anymore. So targeting Washington, D.C., it doesn't quite make sense logically unless you have a narrative.
Oh, yeah, I got all that. But you've answered a question. So it is possible to tap the D.C. Police Department for, if this is January 2026, they might have information as most recent as November 2025?
They should have instantaneous information.
Okay.
So they should have a system in place.
Okay.
Again, and I can't speak for all police departments, but larger police departments should have crime analysts who are I mean, if you think about it, any business would be able to push some buttons and tell you where everything is in a process. And so it's similar with crime. There's reporting of crime. There's arrests that are made. There are whether they're in the system, whether they're whether the crime or the person is in the system for these charges, and whether they go to court or not, whether they're acquitted, whether they're convicted. It's a moving process. But as things are computerized, which when I began studying this, they weren't. Those in the department should be able to access that information at any given time.
Well, thanks for clarifying that for me, truly. So, as a criminologist, would somebody in your area try to distinguish between correlation, that is, there's the dropping crime rate, and now we have the National Guard, and causation, how much of that was attributed to the National Guard? Could that kind of study even be undertaken?
Not now. And the reason I say not, first of all, it's not an experiment. And so we can only get to causation through an experiment.
Okay.
But there's a lot of statistical methods that can use quasi-experiments in order to do that. So we have these number of cities that have had National Guard deployed. We can look at the crime rate beforehand and conduct an analysis to when the National Guard was deployed and compare those to similar cities. I'm just making up a study, right? But you get the idea. Compare those to similar cities that didn't have the National Guard deployed and look at the changes afterwards. But that would take time in terms of letting the data produce itself. And as you know, crime data, like comparable cross-city crime data, isn't produced quickly and by the federal government. The Department of Justice puts out, the FBI, they put out the 2-year lag at quickest. Even though things are being computerized, there's a lot of reasons why there's a delay. So to be able to say that the National Guard is responsible for the drop in crime is it can't be said from a scientific perspective at all.
Well, that's okay because I don't think President Trump is ever concerned about science, is he?
Well, but intuitively, you would think you're going to see a drop in crime. Everything we've discussed is if you put enough guns on street corners, crime's going to drop. But I just can't see that it's sustainable. We're not going to have troops in every city around the country.
Good point.
So, I guess if you're hoping that the data, and I know you're not hoping that the data, everybody wants crime to go down, but if you're thinking the data isn't going to support it, I think that it probably will. And it's just a matter of, is that really the way that we want to live in this society with machine guns on every corner so that somebody isn't robbing somebody or committing a crime? But it is a short-term fix, right? At best.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, these National Guard men and women have to go home. They're not going to be there forever. Another point that we were talking earlier about community policing, and what really, I guess, drove me crazy was that the National Guard is coming from other states.
Oh, yeah, that was big.
That is, why are these guys and gals from Texas going to another state? It just makes really no sense to me.
Or from Ohio to another state, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, I think some of our troops went to D.C.
Yeah.
Politics.
Well,
Politics.
Trump, now again, we go back to Governor DeWine, and at least the reporting I saw is that Trump asked him, and he capitulated. And I think there's a lot of people in our state that don't want our National Guard deployed like that.
Let's change the contour of the conversation just a little. Let's say you were in charge, and you were given jurisdiction over a city that suffered from a higher than average crime rate, however you want to characterize that. And they said, Laura, give us 5 ideas to lower crime in the long term. What would you come up with?
Nice. So as I said, crime is local. And so I couldn't say, here are the 5 things to do, but I can tell you a strategy.
Thank you.
To do it.
Yeah, because first you have to understand it. So I missed the first point.
First, you have to understand it. So I would bring in analysts, and there are people who do this, to come in and study the community, study the crime, look at what is going on, what is the underlying problem. So, for instance, in Boston in the 90s, it was gangs, and so they then worked with the communities and helped, like the churches and the schools, to help meet the needs of those who were involved in these activities that led to a drop in crime and homicides. And so some it's drugs. Some, so I would bring in somebody to understand it, and then what would be needed is this is called SARA policing. So scan, analyze. I don't remember what all the acronym stands for, but I'm not just coming up with this. I'm drawing upon what people have recommended over time. Then and throughout this whole time, collect data, and so then analyze what's happening, evaluate the decisions that have been made, look to see how effective they are, and then tweak them. And so it is a process, and it's a process of understanding. And while all of this is going on, law enforcement are still responding to calls. And when things go wrong in the calls, then they're assessed. There's a whole other layer here. Is you have to understand that a lot of law enforcement is a big inertia machine, also. Right. And so law enforcement has, been about, people who are attracted to doing law enforcement are people that not everyone, but there's a big inertia machine that, may respond poorly to some situations, may get triggered. But there's been a lot of research around that, that shows how important training is, but also retraining. And there are efforts to help people understand their biases and also systematically put things in place. So there was a study that was done, I think it was in Nevada, that looked at arrests that are made in pursuit of so when somebody is in pursuit of somebody who's committed a crime, the person who does the pursuit is not the person that makes the arrest. If somebody else comes in and then makes the arrest.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So it sort of cuts off that adrenaline. And lets it have another outlet. So that somebody more neutral can come in and finish that process. And so like I said, there's a lot of research out there, and to bring in people or hire people to do the analysis, to understand things, to look at what has been happening, what has gone right, what has gone wrong, and work with the system to try to make these changes. Because you also need buy-in from law enforcement. And so because so understanding the whole picture, and then doing an evaluation once addressing these issues. But it is going to be more of a holistic approach in that you need to have community involvement.
But it could also involve things that don't readily come to mind, such as the economic health of the community and how people are suffering individually, none of which is probably popular with politicians, I would imagine.
Yeah. I've always said, so if you ask me a more existential question, like I get to like decide one big policy change for the entire country, it would be not having public education tied to property taxes. I would have there be a big pull for public education that is equally distributed and not tied to neighborhoods. I think that would change crime and a lot of other things very, very dramatically.
Oh, that's so interesting. Well, we could spend
is.
a day on that subject. All right, so there is certainly science behind, and I imagine proven science behind this analysis process.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to believe it's not being undertaken to the extent it could be undertaken or should be undertaken.
Resources.
Money.
Yeah.
Money and politics.
Yeah. Yeah. And also what's being measured? What's being measured to determine budgets? So, always so we look to who's to gain politically, but who's to gain financially. And so when police departments are to collect a certain type of data, and then mayors are to make decisions about budgets based on this, what they're doing. So, if they get higher budgets for more arrests, then they're going to have more arrests.
Sure.
And so I think also creating more of a incentive-based data collection and evaluation process to see what's really happening and develop incentives to help support those rather than sort of these automatic, you haven't had as many arrests, so we're going to lower your budget things. Whereas, lower arrests could be a product of lower crime. And and so
you get penalized for doing the right. You get penalized for your success.
Right.
No, it's way too hard. I think we just send in the troops. Then we don't have to think about it
That's
again.
right. Less thought.
Professor Dugan, you've got some great ideas, and I wish you and more people like you were in charge. But certainly, Jack and I thank you for coming and talking to us about these things.
You're welcome.
Yeah, really. Thank you so much. It was a great conversation. Our thanks to WOSU and our sound engineer, Dalton Jones. If you like what you've heard today, tell a friend. We want this to be more about just us. We want it to be about all of us. Follow us on your podcast. Submit a review. Help elevate our profile so that other podcast listeners can find us. Until next time, so long.